You're listening to the Goof and Grump podcast, where a couple nerds talk all things tabletop role-playing. Here we reflect on our experience, looking for wisdom to make us better players at the table, and hope to give you something to bring back to yours. Today's discussion is around Hexflowers. What are they, how do they work, and how might we use them at the table? Good evening, James. How's it going, nerds?
Good evening, Alex.
We're talking about Hexflowers tonight. The Hexflower flower power.
Yeah,
procedural generation.
I'm pumped. This is something that you brought to my attention, and after a little bit of reading and research on it, I'm very intrigued. Looking forward to this discussion because I just want to kind of dive into it a little bit more. I know you're already using it. You're already building things in it, or you have ideas. But the concept is very enticing.
I have kind of been very much into figuring out what these things are since I discovered them. Like all good ideas, they're just stolen from someone else's blog post from once upon a time. But I think they're really cool, and I want to make my own version. And we're going to talk about what they are and how we use them.
Yeah, I mean, why don't you just kick us off? So, like, give me the elevator pitch, like you like you did already, but for anyone listening, like, what is it? Just a quick explanation.
All right, so a hexflower, as I understand it, is an organization of 19 hexes. It looks like a flower in the picture, but it goes out from the center. It goes 2 hexes down, 2 hexes wide, and 2 hexes up and to the right. So basically, you're going to move a pawn or some kind of indicator along the hex. And the hex could be made up of anything. It could be weather. It could be points of interest. It could be monster placements on a map. Mostly, it is a way of doing more interesting things with your overland map creation. And I'm excited to try to implement it with overland travel and filling out a wide regional area map. So the thought is that you fill in 19 options. There's 19 hexes in the classic Hexflower, and then there's also a movement hex that you use. Basically, each direction on the hex is a 2d6 outcome, and after rolling 2d6, you're going to move your pawn along the Hexflower in whatever direction you rolled on your 2d6. It didn't make any sense to me at first, but after messing around with it and looking at some examples, it's really quite interesting because it's kind of like it's like a roll table, but it has some memory and some context to it. When you're filling out the hex flower, you put all of your safest, most common stuff towards the bottom, the way that they're classically made, and then you put your nastiest or most rare stuff towards the top. And in this way, you will tend, based on the probabilities of 2d6 and the directions that this thing, the way you lay this out, you will tend towards going down to the left, which will tend to be more mundane stuff. But as dice do, when the dice decide, you'll get some interesting things that happen that aren't necessarily just whatever's going on in the GM's fiat or the GM's motivations. Like I personally, as a GM, like I will do the same shit over and over again because I'm comfortable with it. And this is a way to get yourself out of the rut and make something interesting happen.
Yes, I think the problem it solves, right, or the reason that this is interesting is that it kind of helps with some of the randomness. You mentioned it like replaces a roll table, right? And I think we've talked about this example before, maybe not here, but in other discussions. But you have a party, they get to the dungeon, and you've got wolves on the random encounters, but it's a skeleton themed kind of Egyptian touchstone dungeon, and there's wolves. But that's what you rolled, and so like that's what you just kind of deal with, right? So there's kind of like there's not a lot of rhyme or reason to those things, and you can have a table that has a little bit more thematic stuff or cohesion on it, but the randomness I think is still a problem, right? I think this comes up a lot in some of the things we've designed where it's like, hey, on the chart, like one of the outcomes is you encounter the boss monster, and what if you roll, what if you roll the double snake eyes in the first room of the dungeon? Is it just over? Do you fight? Do you go straight
Yeah,
to the encounter, or do you ignore it as the GM? Right, you get put in a position pretty immediately where like that's difficult. And I think with this, the thing that's nice about this Hexflower, and again, probably, I mean, not so much for random, dungeon encounters, but overland travel and other things. Like, you don't jump straight away to worst possible outcome. It takes some build up to get there, right? And it's like the idea of the memory, or where your previous outcomes build upon each other. You can kind of
yeah,
get a
that's
sense for the direction that things are going. Like things are going badly for us on this expedition, right?
yeah.
Um,
That the one of the things that I've really liked trying to harness, which I don't know that I've figured it out yet, but there's an example of a Hexflower cookbook made by Goblin Henchmen, goblinhenchman.blogspot.com, or sorry, goblinhenchman.wordpress.com. And I don't know, I don't think this person was the inventor of it, but I think they're the one that brought it to prominence like a couple of years ago. But they've got a couple of examples. There's like, hunting a monster in the sea, weather, and there's one that's like navigation. But they all kind of do. They're laid out kind of similarly. But what I really like it is that it gives you another option that's not just flat probability on like a rolling a straight D10 or a D20, or the bell curve of 2d6 or 2d10. Like those, I love the bell curve for lots of things, but with this, you can actually extrapolate and create one more level on top of the bell curve by using the bell curve to move around the hex flower, seeding it with different probabilities of things that you want to see. You can make it very probable that you're going to see a lot of mundane stuff, but every once in a while, maybe across like 4, 5, or 6 hexes of rolling on this thing, you're going to find that weird nasty thing. Like you'll find the monster that was hiding, you'll find the wizard's tower that was in the forest. I like anything that enables the gameplay at the table being the thing that's more dynamic and more interesting for both sides of the DM screen.
yeah, I think or almost how I imagine it, right, is it feels more like a putt-putt course where you still have some agency within that to hit well or not, but like there's some guardrails in place, and you kind of predetermine the bounds of what is that is possible in the table, and like things are interconnected and make sense, and so like you don't end up in a situation where it's we've escalated all the way to the end right away, which I think is nice. And I think the other thing which we've talked about as well is it gives you, or it gives the player potentially the option for some agency or to lean into some of the things that aren't necessarily combat strengths. I think we've talked about this before, but like, what if you're, you mentioned the weather as a hex flower, right? And so, what if you're a
Mm-hmm.
storm, you're a tempest cleric, or storm sorcerer, or some flavor of this brand, right? Like, you should be in tune with that, and you might be able to give some kind of benefit to the player for engaging in that kind of role play, which otherwise
Yeah,
doesn't exist because it's just like, well, this is the
yeah. Did the
outcome, right? We
did the
we rolled
GM
this,
remember?
yeah, right. We rolled like a 5 and it storms today. Okay, right, and that happens to that just kind of sort of happens to the player as much as it happens to you. But you can, with this sort of thing, you can tell that it's like, oh yeah, there's a front moving in from the west, right? Knowing that, like, if I roll poorly on the next one, you will most likely encounter this storm, or it could pass. It could go away, but your player character may know that, or it's a little bit of an extra engagement in like these things that are not exactly combat power, right?
Yeah,
But they're
I
things
and
that
I
that
think
characters
that's
have.
that's stuff that I always want to add to the game that feels very much very intensive as a DM to like implement. This feels like a nice compromise between like simulating an entire weather system inside a fantasy world and like just rolling a d6 and or just forgetting about it completely. Like I don't know how many times like I wanted to have it make sense and mean something. What are the phases of the moon? What month, what year, what day of the
Yeah.
week of the month is it, and does it fucking matter? But it doesn't matter unless there's like some plug in to what the characters are deciding on what to do next. What I like about this is like there could be a big fuck off storm, and it's not just because I said there's a big storm that I'm trying to mess with you guys and like steal your resources. It's like, oh no, like we've been hovering around heavy winds and heavy precipitation for a couple days, and now the big fuck off storm is here, and you guys have to hunker down and like spend some resources, and you actually have to think about when you're in overland travel, like, okay, how many rations do we have? Can we get across this terrain without, a bigger problem? Is it worth the risk? Or, even if it just creates some conversation around the weather at the table, I feel like that's a win, because even, we'll play like a Shadow Dark game overland, and the weather just doesn't really matter.
Right. So a couple of things that I want to address in what you said there is I do remember in the Grand World game that you ran for us that you would often start the session with it's, this day of this month and here's the phase of the moon. And often that was kind of like a meaningless like kickoff, but this has potential to change that, right? If it interacts with some other chart or some other mechanism in the game, which I think is nice. So give you a little bit of opportunity to make that meaningful. So I definitely agree with you there. And then the second thing is this interaction with the players kind of creating a new kind of stress or conflict for them out of these things that is not necessarily, again, kind of feels like I'm leaning towards combat, not combat focus, but like not combat focus, right? Where it's okay, well, it's pouring rain. So explain to me how then you are going to make camp for the night safely, because, we're playing Shadow Dark and you have no light and you cannot run your torches in the pouring rain. So what are we doing? Right? Like your adventure, the adventure kit, the Delver kit that you bought at level 1, like, is it useful now? Because I feel like a lot of times the only thing that ever comes out of that, right? Like when we play these games and we get like new players initiated, it's just like, yeah, just bring the torches. Because like everything else is just, it feels like you might need that, but you probably don't, right? You don't need pinions and rope or whatever it is.
Yeah,
someone
most
else will
level
carry it.
one shots you can get away with just rations, or not even rations, like just torches.
Right.
You don't need rations or any of the other stuff in the kit, unless the GM makes it apparent. And if there's more than 3 or 4 players in the game, the GM's probably not going to worry about it in a one shot, especially for new players.
No, but if you end up in a progression of a couple days of overland travel and end up in a storm, then it does matter all of a sudden in a one shot, and it actually changes the environment, or it might change the decisions that your players make in terms of like, okay, well, listen, we know this, the baddie is in this forest, but like, are we really going to go in there without the cover of torches in the middle of the rain? Like what else, might that, like what other problems might that present for us? Which I think makes this interesting, right? It's just another way to engage with the world where you're not kind of arbitrarily making decisions on behalf of like the table. I think that's really what I like about it, right? It kind of like leads up to things. It escalates and de-escalates things kind of naturally, and you don't have to play like tempo or pace keeper as much as the GM. I do think on the flip side, though, I'd be interested to know, with the way this is going, if you like something heading a certain direction on the flower on the chart, right? You like that it's leading up to maybe a certain outcome. Like, do you fudge it with the movements?
Yeah, I mean that's one thing that I'm trying to figure out. So 2 things. One is, one of the things that got me excited about this was just it is like an answer to like all of the simulationist bent stuff that like I have like I have like the heart for, but not the willpower for.
Right.
So like I can create something that can answer those questions at the table, which is awesome, huge. The other thing is like I very much find myself when I'm testing out these Hexflowers or any roll table really, I I become like insanely aggravatedly frustrated with the roll stay here, like don't move. And there's no real good fucking reason for it. There's no there's no there's no like there's only lizard brain involved there. Like
Yeah.
there is no higher functioning where I'm like, yeah, it should be, it's perfectly reasonable to assume that every once in a while you're going to roll and you're just going to get the same result you had last time. I like always want to move the thing.
Yeah.
And I struggle with that because anytime you're using a well-made roll table or even like something like this Hexflower that's been thoroughly thought out, you should, if you're going to use the tool like that, it's my opinion that you should just go with the rolls. If you've chosen the dice to decide, you need to honor that and let them decide. And I struggle with that because I want, like, I'm like, okay, we've been hovering around. I want to see it. Let's do it. But I know through my experience that at the table, it always turns out into a better story just going with the dice, even if I don't feel like it's going to be worth a shit at the time. You know what I mean? Like I've flirted with fudging things here and there. And I think when you feel like you should fudge, that's more a weakness of whatever tool you're using. You should, make the tool, design the tool, grind the tool to the point where, or hone the tool to the point where no matter what gets rolled, you're going to go with what's rolled.
Yeah. Which I guess brings up an interesting point I hadn't actually thought about until you were talking about this now. Are there nothing happens outcomes on the Hexflower? Is that a typical thing that you include?
So the thing is, you'll typically have like the nothing happens or the absolute baseline thing at the very bottom. But the 2d6 rolling, where the movement hex stuff, there's more than one outcome that leads to just staying where you were by the default one that I found on the internet. And I absolutely fucking hate that. I rearranged it so that the probabilities are mostly the same, but I only have one outcome where I'm staying still and I'm staying on the same tile. I can't show you obviously right now, but I've got like a heat map where like the cooler options, if you imagine a hex, 6 sides,
Right.
the north, northwest, and northeast are the coolest. Those are the least likely to happen. So like at the north, I've got 2 and 12. At the northwest, I got 4. Northeast, I have 3. So those are the things that are least likely to happen. Rolling a 7 on 2d6 is you stay still. You stay at the same hex and you just fill in whatever for that hex. And then the most likely stuff to happen is the bottom 3, south, southwest, and southeast. But it has like a southwestern bent to it. So down and to the left is always like if you're just going off the probabilities of the 2d6 roll, your most likely outcome is you're going to be going down and to the left. And what you do with the Hexflower that actually makes it to where you can still get surprises and interesting things is you let it wrap around. So you could be going down to the left, but you can end up on the upper right portion of the Hexflower. And then this is where the design has to get honed again, where you got to close off certain paths. Like you don't want going from like your very most basic outcome, like from the 1 up to the 19. Like that's bad. You don't want to go from just absolutely nothing going on to like, there's a fucking earthquake, like right now. And maybe sometimes you want to do that, right? But like by design for general use, you don't want to do that.
Yeah. You go from peaceful midday, nothing happening to the power is out at the T-Rex paddock. You're like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But as a system to explore, I'm really enjoying like fudging around with it. I'm liking it for weather. I love it. Subhexes on a regional map. I am experimenting with that and having fun doing that. But it's also, I've given each one of these hexes like a biome, like forest, lake, mountain, whatever. And what I want to do is I want to have three types of hex flowers: one for a civilized area, one for a frontier area, one for a wilderness area. And then I'm filling in the subhexes. So each hex has 19 subhexes. Those 19 subhexes, I'm using a hex flower to determine what's actually there. We're going to use the wilderness hex flower, and I'm going to roll on it 19 times, and I'm going to fill in that hex. It like stays that way. If it's a forest hex, the default's going to be a forest. It's going to be established as this thing. And then if you go over to the next hex and you're going to actually dig through, you're going to do the same thing for 19 subhexes in that hex. And each subhex is 1.2 miles, and it makes it so that you can discover where something might be. So you could tell the party, hey, so you learned about the approximate location of this dungeon. Now that dungeon is where you're going to get if the hex flower ever goes to all the way to the top, number 19. And then we could just figure out together where it actually is. And I fucking love that idea.
Yeah, so a little bit more of like exploration, because I think that's actually one of those things that's a little bit difficult to deal with, right? With the overland travel piece, it's like you have to go to the dungeon, and you just happen to know exactly where it is, and it's 3 days, and you can play it up and be like complications happen along the way, but more or less everyone knows where they're going, and they're going to end up there. But what if it's like it's like a pyramid in the middle of the jungle, a ziggurat, right? Like, I don't know. Can you find it? A lot of people say it's like east, but how are you going to find it? And like, what are some things? So like, yeah, like putting it up there, as an option, right? And then potentially progressing towards it is interesting. I like that.
I think it's infinitely better than just a survival roll or even a group check.
Right.
And you could, if you've got a ranger in the party, you could give them some benefit towards getting there. This kind of falls into a category of like tools that I really like after looking into stuff that like OD&D remakes do, where they basically have a D6 system for literally everything. There's always a way you can develop a system to do what you want to do that doesn't completely bog you down and doesn't rely on the players just letting the GM do whatever they want to do. There's an intermediary system that can be brought into existence.
And especially in most cases where it's like kind of predetermined and we know what it's going to be, or like what the potential outcomes are. It's just finding out like when or how long it might take for something to occur. Right.
For sure.
Rather than just like, well, I don't know. I feel like it's 3 days travel because like it's between this far and that far with my fingers when I put them on a map,
Yeah.
So, okay. So I feel like we have a pretty good grasp on like what it is or benefits these things provide. Who would you say these systems are primarily for then? Who is it intended to be the primary audience for a hex flower? Is it the GM? Is it like certain kind of players, or like what do you estimate?
It feels like it's too much to figure out at the table for many cases. I mean, you could do weather like at the table.
Sure.
Fine. You could just have it printed out behind your DM screen or whatever. But I feel like if you're filling in anything else like on a map, I feel like it leans more towards GM. Your GMs, your world builders, especially the way I'm like focused on using them right now and designing for them right now. What I'm creating is about filling out a big ass hex map. I mean, that's kind of where my mindset is I think, and solo players, I think get a lot out of something like this while you're in play. I think it's an excellent tool because, one that's well designed is expected craziness. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
You're going to get into something at some point. You just don't know when.
Yeah, I think that's the most exciting bit of it for me is the solo player interaction there. If you're doing a solo player expedition right into a cursed forest, it can be like, how strong is the curse the further I go in there? And it gives you some other decision-making matrix as a player that's not like you feel like you're kind of putting yourself on rails or you're putting yourself like into a weird position or just ignoring mechanics, right? You're like, well, I've been rolling and like here's how badly this is, or actually like the curse is not too bad for me, so I feel like I can keep going another couple days before I have to turn around. And it introduces something that I think you don't necessarily have. Like the party would fill that role. I could imagine that happening in a larger party play where it's like, guys, it's the warlock or whatever. It's like, hey guys, we need a long rest because I did a thing today, and now it's time. So I don't know. I mean, I really like the idea. That was the first thing that came to mind when I was reading this is solo players and the advantages they might get from a system like this or implementing something. Feeling a little bit less like they're just arbitrarily choosing make believe things, right?
Yeah, let me ask you this. Would you, if there's one for something besides weather, would you want to see where it's at as like an indicator of how puckered you should be, or would you prefer like the GM describe where you're at?
I think depending on what it is, like what the flower represents, but in general, I think just off the cuff, I would prefer to see it because I think that adds an interesting element, as I was saying, as like decision making for the players, right? And it's not necessarily the GM is like responsible for creating that. So, in one of the suggestions for Daggerheart, and I like this suggestion, is that Mercer's is like, hey, you know the currency that you get as a GM in that game is fear, and initiate combat and take the spotlight in combat and take your turns and do the devastating moves, right? But he suggests that you show it to the players so they know how much you have. And so that at any given time, they're like, hey guys, maybe we don't knock down this door right now because they know that like you're loaded up. You got like 8 fear in a 6-player game or something. You're all maxed out. It's like this will go very poorly for us if we do it now. I don't know how you do it on some of the games that we've played where it would make sense, but like one of the very first Shadow Dark dungeons that you ran for us, the Red Minotaur one, right? We spent several sessions going back into that and fully exploring the whole thing. And I think in that scenario, something I think that would have been interesting, and I don't know how it fits on the Hexflower, but it's like some kind of progression about like, there's a lot of factions in that one. So like as factions go, it would be like, well, how are things going for you with like I forget, it was like the Lost Boys gnomes, right? Like if you do some favors, if you follow their requests, do you get to progress on the chart? Like, will they join you for the final fight or will they backstab you, right? Because you're making other choices. And so like, that is interesting because then it has like some consequences and you're somewhere on the chart, and I'd love to see that. That kind of heads into a direction where, it might as well just be like a bar or something, right? And you're just like, you're somewhere between 0 and 10. And here you are. Like, this is your general thing, right? And it's like, well, I don't really know that the Hexflower is necessary for that.
It's still an open question. Factions is something that I'm also very interested in simulating in a functional, easy way. And I think I have seen examples, or I've seen someone tell examples of using Hexflowers for faction. There is like a fine line between when this kind of abstraction works versus just a ladder. Like basically, you're moving up. You can go plus or minus 3 with this faction or 5 with this faction, and then that is tracked, and that's just a number.
Right.
And that's also something that you can display very easily where the party is in relation to a thing. That's interesting. You mentioned the howler gnomes or halflings or whatever they were. I want to get more of that involved in the gameplay. I want more faction stuff and all these things going on in this soup. I want it to feel real though.
Yeah.
I mean, to your question, I think the Hexflower is too much for factions, but I'm gonna go digging for sure. That's something I'm
I
looking
guess
at.
the way that you're describing it too, and maybe this is a good like follow up question, right? And getting into the more discussion or critique of it, but like, so it's often pitched as like uh, a table with memory, right? Is
hmm
the memory of like a Hexflower always a strength, or can it end up in a way where it's like too predictable?
Uh, that's a good question. On paper, it seems more predictable than I think it actually is in practice. So I've been rolling like I'll be like, okay, let's fill in a 19 hex grid just to test out, how I'm feeling about the 19 options. Basically, the typical thing that I've seen is like you go from the bottom to the top with a numbering system of 19 hexes. But you don't necessarily from down left to upright or anything like that. You just kind of like go do bottom up. So your bottom's one, and then two, three, and then four. And then where you start to get into this weird thing where it's like, where do you put five or six or eight or nine? Because they're hexes and they kind of like shift as you stack them on top of each other. How you organize them and what your expectation is of where the more mundane results are versus the more rare results depends on how you set them in the grid. And then once you set them in the grid, you can go in any direction. When you get to the edges, they wrap around unless you're in the more extreme results. So when you're in the more extreme results, what I've seen a lot of times is they'll put bars or X's where you can't go from like a super mundane result to a super extreme result.
Yeah, you can't wrap around.
Roll, but you can wrap around everywhere else. Gotcha. So in that way, like this is what I've seen in practice is like I'm hovering around the bottom. I'm getting a lot of the same result, and then there's one that breaks free that wraps around up to like the top left of it. So like you go from 2 to like 17, and then you hover around there in the nasty shit for a little while, and then it kind of like slowly comes back down to that same area, which I think is really cool.
By odds, right? You should be moving down and left. So
yes, by odds you should be moving down and left, but sometimes the dice are like, fuck the odds. I'm gonna roll four times in a row, and you're gonna go straight up and into the shit and stay there for a little bit. Does it feel super predictable, or can it get into a rut? And I feel like on paper it looks like it's more ruddy or has a higher probability of getting stuck in a rut than I feel like it really does.
Right.
Especially if you evaluate it over like 3 to 4 actual like complete cycles of using the thing. I feel like in a single use of it, it can feel like you're just hovering around one chunk of it and you're doing a lot of the same answer. But I feel like use of it over a wider area or wider scope definitely gives you the variability that you're looking for without it being super predictable.
So you basically sample size will help make you feel less predictable, as with most things. So
I have been thinking about like how crazy can you, what could you simulate with this thing that would be ridiculous? Like, could you do the musings of a monarch maybe that wants to start trade wars for no reason, and especially with countries that it has a good relationship with, and tank the economy or something like that?
Sure. I could see that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the idea here of like this memory or progression is really interesting. I know I've talked with you using one to kind of represent a player's relationship to their deity, like the source of their power, right? So you've got your warlocks, clerics, and paladins, typically, who have some kind of divine or other influence that is giving them, lending them power, right? And having some kind of chart with memory that is like, okay, well, you did a thing, right? Like you spent your downtime feeding the homeless in a city, right? So like, how is that aligned with the values of your patron or deity? And does it confer any benefits? Like, can you roll to do it? I think so I like that as a concept, but the problem that you immediately end up with there, that should always result in a positive outcome, right? And so,
unless the gods are fickle,
I guess it could be, right. Like if it's a fey deity or something, like sure, yeah, just you never know. Like just roll to see if you progress and see if your powers change, which is also interesting, like in its own right. Like what are your blessings? But yeah, I don't know, because then you end up in that scenario before where you find, or at least I would find myself wanting to fudge the roll, saying it's like, look, you can only progress from doing this, or you've headed a direction that is clearly like oath breaking, and you can only regress, right? And not
Well,
that like
yeah,
the bottom, or like I guess in this case the top of the chart would be all bad things, right? It's like no, it's like an oathbreaker. Hell, you might get some benefit, some like fury or an extra swing or something, right? Like that's actually not that bad of a bonus. It's just like you had to do some stuff to get there, right?
yeah. And what do you think about this? I'm just thinking about this while we're talking about it, but the relation with the deity, you want an action that pleases that deity to be a positive interaction, so you don't have to like fudge roll. But what if you needed to find the site or a thing that you needed to do to perform that? You could use the hex flower for that purpose to, well, like a monster hunt, or like to actually find the ley line, or the location where the thinning veil is weak enough that you can communicate with your gods stuck on
Sure.
the other side of
Yeah,
the
I could
gate.
see too. Like the Blades in the Dark system had things that were like, hey, like you're a chemist, so you get experience for doing chemist things this round, and or this game, right? And that's one of the ways in which you level up. And so I could totally see like the flower being the like kind of your mini quests. What does your deity want you to do?
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that you could do that would please it? And they probably get more obscure or more difficult, like the closer to the top you get, right? But then,
Yeah.
but then accomplishing those allows you to roll and like move on the chart, and then those are kind of randomized, right? But then you just have kind of a progression of powers,
Yeah.
right? The whether you're heading towards alignment or oath breaking, and that's kind of like up to you how you want to do it. But then the things or like the little like mini quests or tasks on the chart could be you know lean one way or the other, right? Are you kicking all the dogs in town, or are you like feeding feeding the poor, right? It's kind of up to
Oh.
you. Yeah. But
Yeah, I think it depends. Like, where do you draw the line between having the ladder or the flower? I think this is something that definitely piques my interest. Like, I definitely want to see, like, where is it viable? Where does it just kind of fall apart? And it's exciting to have a new tool to fuck around with. Like, it just feels like something that's new, even though I'm sure this is not new. I'm sure this is something that has been around for a long time, because I've heard the term hex flower thrown around, but it's new to me. So I'm gonna pretend like it's brand
I mean,
new.
it's new to me also, so I like it. I like the discussion around it. So we're getting kind of into creative applications, or maybe like different ways to like potentially hack the flower itself, the flower system. So beyond the standard and obvious things that we've talked about, like terrain, weather, hunting a whale at sea or something, right? Um, have you seen anything that pushes the system in kind of new or unexpected ways for you?
I have seen, like, the Mythic Game Master emulator. There's one of the Goblin Henchman's uses for the hex flower thing is like to make a randomized hex flower version of the chaos factor for that roll system. So Mythic GM is a solo system that uses a rising and falling chaos factor to add. It's a fun system for making it interesting for a solo player. So using the flower rather than a flat scale makes it so that it could go up, it could go down, it could go sideways. I think that's interesting. Anytime you see something that moves on a flat scale but might actually benefit from a little bit more randomization, but not just GM fiat, I think this is like the cut that this thing lives in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of the in between space where it's like really you shouldn't be
Yeah.
spending time making a heavy decision about this, but it's too important or like too big a part of the current story or where your party is at to just leave it up to a D100 table.
I think I agree with that statement. Like, it is an abstraction to simulate things that you could definitely fall into a hole and like waste a bunch of effort and time doing. But you don't want it to be too simple. You want it to feel more real. So this kind of like adds some weight to it. I'm seeing like I'm clicking through the internet right now while we're talking about it, and I'm seeing a couple things where like somebody made one. They use it to determine an actual delve in a dungeon itself. Like there's a level change, you go up or down. There's a locked door. There's a regular passageway, and like it seems again like a good solo tool where you're going around a dungeon and you don't know if there's going to be a skill challenge or a blocked hallway. Very old school sentiment there, but what kind of creatures are you running into? There's Hexflowers for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Some of it seems like a stretch, like I guess the interesting bit on for our purposes of our discussion is like, where do you think this kind of thing lives? And I think we are on the same page about where we think it lives, but I don't know. There's definitely some massaging to be done and some theories to like put into practice and see where they fall out.
My question with that, and like I guess talking a little bit, we touched briefly on it as like something for interacting with a deity or like kind of this out of the box application of it. Do you think like what's your estimate on like the potential for the hex flower as a core mechanic rather than just like generating results or like generating a something like as a generator?
When you say core mechanic, you mean like being able to handle combat or
Maybe not so much combat, but like I guess the everything everything outside of that, right? Like the narrative
everything else?
pieces, the I think very often, right? Like downtime is complicated, and like there probably should be something for downtime where it's like, like hey guys, this is the sixth bar in a town with 3 bars that you've been kicked out of during downtime, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
there's something to that, right? like,
Okay, so
like,
I get your question.
yeah,
So I guess my immediate thought is I like this as another thing that can be put in the mix with like clocks, the diminishing pools idea,
mm-hmm.
uh, and and just like abstracted out of six measurement devices. So like when I say that, I'm talking like you might have a faction. All of your factions have like a 1 to 6 rating, and then you're using that to like roll a d6 to determine something based on your faction alignment. At the same time, you can come up with 19 options for what your factions are up to, and you can systemize that to like be applicable to all of your factions.
Mm-hmm.
This 100% could be used for that. Okay, so the faction might be getting angry with neighbors, might be doing some recon, maybe there's some options out here where something terrible happens to that faction.
Yeah.
This could definitely be for that. I think I answered the question in that this tool combined with other tools for these abstractions, as long as they're all at a certain kind of level, they make a lot of sense to me for how they can all plug it together. And this hex flower thing kind of fills a space that I was really having trouble finding something to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's better than just like arbitrarily, for your purpose, you're building a city instead of arbitrarily like, oh, this is a baker, and I rolled on the chart, and there happens to be another one next door, and like that's just what it is, right? There's 2 in this part of town now, but using it to make your city, making it feel more real, I think makes sense.
I could see designing them in a way where utilizes the context to kind of massage the outcome. So if you've got a hex that you rolled and it's got a bakery and you've got like rich hexes all around it, then that bakery is going to be like high-end Macron hoity-toity French bakery, right? Versus like feeding bread to the poor. Like to me that like allowing the context of everything around it to affect it is only additive.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to get a little creative with it, but like that's probably like half the point of the thing anyways, is like getting creative and not just like dumping stuff into a table and being like, all right, well, let's just see, So very interesting concept. I'm very interested to see how it plays out in next sessions. And
do you see something that you would use this for, or you'd want to try using it
I've
for?
always really liked that weird and wild system, and I think I described in here already how like the general like curse of the forest, right? I'd probably do something along those lines, right? running like a Shadow Dark game with weird and wild like rules or systems in place. And then basically the premise of that, right, is that the open world, the forest itself is the dungeon. I love that idea, right? And so exploring what is in like the current hex that you're in, like let's just say that's what the players want to do that session. They want to explore, they want to find out what's there. It's like, well, let's discover together. And I think that that's where something like this makes a lot of sense, right? Where it's like I don't necessarily have a thing. There's just like a lot of potential encounters. There's a lot of potential baddies that you could see here, but let's find out.
So okay, would you have like so if you're moving in the rarer part, like the northern part of the Hexflower, is it getting more dangerous or the curse is becoming more prominent or something like that?
Yes, I would think so, right? Or potential outcomes are worse, right? Because either way, you might just be walking through like a swamp, and if you went through it already, that's fine. But like, you can make the argument for like the higher it is up on the flower, that it's like actually gonna end up in like a showdown, or gonna end up in like, oops, you fell and now all your torches are covered in mud and you can't light them for 24 hours, and that creates other terrible, potentially bad outcomes where it's like, well, of course you can stay in these woods. That's up to you. But who's gonna watch the camp?
Oppressive darkness is on the rise.
Kind of giving it like a personality, right? And then like the things,
Yes.
you go from losing your torches in quicksand or some mud, like a mud problem, to suddenly you encounter a wandering merchant who is there, and it's like that. This is a little disparate. I'm not sure they belong together.
All right. Well, do you feel like we've covered the Hexflower to satisfaction?
I think so, until we get a little bit more experience, like actually playing with it, understanding like how it feels, right? Like I definitely really have enjoyed the concept, the idea of it, the things that it brings, and I agree that the problems that it's trying to solve are problems, right? So regardless of how I feel when it works out, like if it's not this, something will address these. I'm hoping it's this, right? Or like some flavor of this hex flower thing can be used to address the seemingly random outcomes sometimes, and like the things where it's like I'm just hoping that like this can be it for us. But if not, I'm sure there's more systems, more other things out there that we can find. But I agree, at least with their the sales pitch, where like the problem that they say that everyone has, I kind of tend to agree that it is a problem. So
Yeah. I have the same excitement. I'm like, this could be something that really becomes an excellent tool in the toolkit. And if it does, it's going to solve a lot of problems for me because it's been years I've been trying to figure out overworld exploration abstraction in a way that I want it to feel.
right,
So here's hoping.
here's open.
But I'm always open to new ideas,
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we will be at Gen Con in 2 weeks. We probably won't record another conversation before then. So I'm excited to do that. I'm excited to go to Nerd Mecca and see all the awesome things that are out. The question I wanted to ask you is, and I'll answer, what's the TTRPG related thing that you're most excited for in this moment?
In this precise moment, it's still very much Daggerheart, and I want to play in a session at Gen Con if possible, being led by somebody. And inversely, I also, probably more exciting than just experiencing that would be to run that, to return to GMing a little bit, using that system and teaching that to some of our friends who we've played with for a while. So that's really the big thing for me. It's hard not to be excited about that.
That's a good answer. I will say that I want to be into that Daggerheart shit. It is sold out everywhere. I tried to get my hands on a copy and I wasn't able to. So
Yeah.
I will be looking to purchase it at Gen Con. I think if anywhere that I'm going to be able to do it, it's going to be there.
Yeah.
But if I can't, I will be butthurt about it. but not much else. So the thing that I am very much excited for in this exact moment is that I have my copy of Mythic Bastionland from Chris McDowell of Into the Odd fame being delivered on Friday. I want to consume that book very much so, and I don't even know if I'll ever run it, but there's some ideas in there just from listening to him talk about it that I'm really excited to see how they work out. And I might run a one shot just to fuck around with it. But
And this is the one that used to move the really excellent like die cut like 2 or 3 color art, right?
oh yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
I think the artist's name was Alex Sorensen. Phenomenal. It just fucking drips with style.
It's got that aura, as the kids say these days.
Dude, yeah, yeah, it sure fucking does. And I want it inside me. I want to experience it.
Okay. All right.
You know?
Excellent.
Yeah, awesome. So, okay, well, James, thank you for joining me to discuss Hexflowers tonight.
Always happy to.
This has been Alexander Zakis and James Ekdahl of the Goof and Grump podcast. Find more from us at goofandgrump.com and additional writing and materials at glyphandgrok.substack.com and grumpcraft.substack.com. Thank you for listening.